Hey Charlie, we're back again. It's your turn for the hot seat here.
I'm excited.
Yeah, you're ready for this?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, you know what we're talking about today. I reviewed a YouTube video that you created. You actually created it 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's still valid. I mean, when I was looking through some of the elements of it, the video for our audience, we'll put a link to it in the comments and everything, but it's called 10 software tools that I personally use to increase productivity, and all 10 of those tools are still valid tools and things that I think I could tell that you would use, and having worked with you, I know that you do use.
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, kind of take a divergence from what the video is about for a second, because, you know, at the core of the topic of the video is talking about productivity tools that are not Excel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the implication there is that Excel is like a given for you, that it's, when it comes to productivity tools, that's like, of course you use Excel and you use it a lot. And I thought before we jump into the actual topic of the video, maybe we could talk a little bit about that point, that,
Sure.
you know, is my assumption right?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, it comes from, you know, working in accounting, of course. That's what we do. And so often the medium that we work in is Excel, right? Everything kind of ends in a spreadsheet, starts and ends in a spreadsheet. And there's so much kind of meat on the bone of how to be proficient at Excel that I felt it'd be a good idea to focus actually on anything, you know, other than that, because I think so often that's where the magic happens, you know. And I had kind of a lot of videos talking about ways to use Excel more efficiently, but I think a lot of people imagine that accounting starts and ends in the spreadsheet. And I found that in my experience that can be true. I've met accountants that do that, but I've also come across ones that don't really stop there. They're looking for other ways to improve what they do, and they sometimes feel that the answer isn't in that spreadsheet, you know.
Yeah. Well, and so you and I have known each other for quite a while, and I remember I didn't meet you right when you started your career in accounting, but probably shortly after. And in your career, you started in a company that was an e-commerce SaaS company, and you worked your way up over time to running the accounting and finance function of that company. And so I guess where I'm leading to the question as it relates to Excel is this idea that Excel is like a central tool for accountants, or a central tool even in your own practice and how you get things done. Was it always the case? I mean, from day one when you started, way back then in the accounting, when you first started your accounting career, was Excel something you thought of as an essential tool way back then, or did that grow to be the case over time?
I think right off the bat there, it was definitely true that Excel was going to be, it was immediately apparent to me that it was going to be a big part of my day, because they had an environment where everything was done at scale, everything was at volume. And so a lot of places will, for example, get away with things like an order form that they do on paper and then they submit it, and that's what they need to run their business, and it's enough. But as soon as you branch out into having 1,000 orders or something to deal with, suddenly all those things stop working. And so I think Excel being a crucial tool really came from the fact that every single problem I was ever presented with in that environment was always at scale, always at least 1,000 items or something. And so you just had to have some scalable approach, because otherwise you'd end up being there all day. Yeah. And I did that a few times, like in the beginning, not knowing the answer, right? When first starting out in the career, you get presented with a problem, you find a way to manually get through it a little bit, and so you start doing it, but it's taking too long. And you know, I think that's where you end up getting forced into finding a better way.
And for our audience, if they search Charlie Zigmond on YouTube, you actually have a few videos in there about Excel specific type tools. Right? So that's, you know, if you're looking for that Excel knowledge, you know, check out Charlie's YouTube channel there as well. But for today, you know, I kind of wanted to get that kind of baseline of course, Excel is like this important tool. It's been important in your practice. It's something that I recognize we use, of course, a lot as accountants in general. Well, but getting back to this topic, which is really about the tools other than Excel that you use in practice. And when I was looking through that video and listening to it, what I found is I felt like there were a couple of core themes to all the tools that you were selecting and the discussions you were having in that video. And one of those themes was about presenting to others, sharing with others, collaboration with others. And and so like an example was a tool that helped you take any kind of work that you were doing and turn it into a PDF and then share it with others. And I'm sure people have their favorite tools for that, but you had a tool that you like doing that, and again, people can check out your video and kind of see kind of the tool that you're recommending on that. But in any case, is being able to share that kind of collaboration. I mean, this sounds almost obvious, but I guess I'm asking the leading question to get you to speak to this point about collaboration and sharing. What is the importance of that in your overall workflow?
Well, I think it's a great question. I'll start by answering it in the opposite way. What caused me to kind of go down that route? Because in the beginning, I didn't used to do that. I would make spreadsheets, I would share the spreadsheets with people, and then I would inevitably get the feedback of, I don't want to be playing around in spreadsheets. I want the answer that I want now. And I got that feedback from multiple people on multiple projects. And on the one hand, you could get defensive about it. You could say, well, the answer is in there. You just got to use the tools I'm sharing with you here. But as you kind of grow a little bit in your career, you realize, well, maybe they're right. Maybe the answer is that we need to be able to present work in a way that anybody can view it, whether they're on whatever operating system, whatever tools they're comfortable using or not using. And we have to accept that even though we love Excel and we believe the answer we were trying to present might work in Excel, but we need to accept that other people aren't going to want that, and they're going to be wanting to see it in their own work. And so it was just a theme for me to have that keep coming up. I think part of that came from having a Mac-heavy environment as well. So I would use Windows, and a lot of people there would use Mac or Linux, and so that would kind of drive it as well. But it really just comes down to, can the person you're showing something to see it exactly how you see it? And it just really helps make that true.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's an important skill that a lot of accountants learn over time, is creating the work in a fashion that it can be shared and it is accessible to whoever your audience is, right? Because, so often I find, particularly with junior accountants, is that they're learning their own personal tool set, right? Like maybe they don't have the optimal Excel skills when they first start, and so they're excited about learning Excel, and then they're doing all this spreadsheet programming and formatting, and they're doing all this great stuff in Excel, and they're excited about it because they're learning it, and then they're using Excel to get to an answer, and then they just like throw the spreadsheet at people, and they're like, okay, in the Excel format. So they send the Excel workbook to whoever it is that their audience is. And in some cases that might be fine. Like if their audience is maybe a supervisory accountant that is happy to look at the Excel worksheet and maybe even wants to, because by looking through the formulas and tracing back the links, they get a better understanding of what the junior accountant was thinking about, right? But a lot of times, exactly what you were saying, it's like, well, the other members of management in a business may not want to open an Excel workbook, and they may not want to dig through a spreadsheet, and they may not want to actually understand all of the details that it took you to get to the answer. They just want the answer, right?
Absolutely. And I think so often that the product they're requesting is almost never a spreadsheet, right? It's always the output. It's always the deliverable. I want the report. I want the answer, like you said. And so, I think it's good to be able to separate those two things.
One of the other themes that I saw among the different applications that you were choosing to talk about was organization. And I've had some like philosophical thoughts about organization myself, but one kind of organization that your tools were speaking to was like, how do you track tasks and projects? And you brought up the tool Trello, for example, which is something I've used before as well. And from my perspective, it's like Trello is an organization tool that really speaks to the list maker in me, somebody who's going to like make a list of things that need to be done and check them off the list as they're done, kind of thing. But what I found over time is I've started considering the difference between, okay, me being the list maker and me being the scheduler. And, do I keep lists of things to do, or do I put the things that I do into like a calendar or some other like scheduling program or some other way to visualize when that thing would get done, and how visualize the task in time and space rather than just in the abstract of, oh, it's something that has to be done and maybe it's a higher or lower priority than other tasks, but I'm not really visualizing when it would get done when I'm making lists. And I don't know if I'm making any sense on that, but I've waffled back and forth between making lists and scheduling. I've tried to do both and reconcile them to each other, but where I've landed today and in my work life today is that I've settled on just scheduling and not doing the lists and not trying to reconcile the two. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think this is a really good question because I've too struggled with that same thing. I've started with the calendar in the morning and said, man, there's 10 things I got to do today. Let's go and block them in as hour chunks and see how many I can get through. And I've had success with that approach. So I do think there's a lot of value in doing that. I think where it becomes tricky and is when you know how long it will take, then that works. When you know when you can start, then that works. If you don't know either of those things, but you're aware an issue exists, so you want to get it on the table, you want to remember it, you want it off of your mind, right? You don't want to be thinking about it as you're working on other things, so you need to memorialize that thought somewhere. But you can't say when you're going to start on that particular thing. There's still ambiguity. There's still maybe a working you need from a client that you don't have, so you can't say when it will start. But you see that value of, I still need to document this. And I think really the list maker approach came from being frankly overwhelmed in the past, right? Having 20 things on my mind and saying, gosh, I know I got a lot to do. Let's get them on paper. And then I could start to, like you said, visualize them, prioritize them, and that sort of thing. And so for me, it's been almost more therapeutic to do that than it is even so much as a day planning tool, because it's more about just getting all of the things that are stressing you onto a board. And then once you've got them there, then you can focus in on each one and not get overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what's behind the scenes. And for me, that's been really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and along these lines of organization philosophies, might be running out of battery.
The timing on it's good.
Yeah.
Good, a natural cut. Okay.
But I'll let it be. We got enough other cameras going. It's fine. But all right.
I was gonna say wave your hand.
Another one. Yeah. Yeah. So on the topic of organizing, another philosophical organizational issue that I've wrestled with is to be a filer or to be a searcher, and some of the tools that you talked about kind of get at this issue. And so, and I think again, you could be both and like reconcile the two. But when I talk about being a filer, I think that, which is, I have to admit, sounds almost like a Luddite to approach organizing files this way in today's world. But I still kind of think of it more this way, in the sense of being meticulous about creating a file structure, creating folders, and very standardized labeling for those folders, and making sure everything has its place, so that when I'm searching, and I'm talking digitally, right? Like, I'm not that much of a Luddite. I'm not talking about actual paper, but I'm talking about digitally, and I know from my previous working experience with you, and then it also reminded me when I saw kind of one of the tools that you were reviewing and talking about, that it always, when I work with you, I always remember like how behind I am on that point, because the other approach, I would say, on the other end of the spectrum is, why does it even matter what folder you put something in, or your standardization of labeling, if you have good search skills, right?
Yeah.
And so and so I'm curious. I mean, I know that you have good search skills, and I know that you make really and that your go-to in terms of document organization is being able to search things. I don't know that means I don't know that means that it's exclusive. In other words, I've never paid attention or asked, are you also a filer on the front end? So I'd be curious, are you doing both? Are you just doing one or the other? Or do you think one's more important than the other?
I think they're equally important. Well, that's not true. I think they're both very important. I'll say that. I definitely do both. I try, and I'm going to be careful here. I try to do both, and I sometimes find myself regressing into only the search approach. But if I remember to, I try to keep elements of the file names, syntax there so that I can have it be easy to find. And I have had a lot of instances where your approach of kind of having a general folder on a topic-based kind of a thing, and then putting things in there that you know are related, but you may not later be able to remember the exact keywords in the file name. I've found stuff that way, so I think it is very helpful to do both. I think that they're not as mutually exclusive as you might think, right? Having one doesn't stop the other, and I think that having both is really the best of both worlds if you can get it. And historically it's been pretty difficult because for a long time I tried to do that with just Windows search, and it's just really bad. It just doesn't work. It like will work sometimes, but not reliably enough. And I worked in places where they were making heavy use of network drives, and so that really solved it. But there was always just more and more directories somewhere with things you need in them, and you just get tired of looking for them. Mm-hmm. And so you figure out that there's some other tool, and once you find that, you realize, man, I open files all day every day. I open about 100 files a day. So this topic that seems tangential comes up constantly. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I've been a big fan of that one. That's called Everything for anybody listening. It's from a company called Void Tools, which is not the most, not my favorite name of a company, but has been a great tool.
Cool. Knowing you, and when I watch the video, I really see the video, the topic, I see it as an expression of your passion for improving process. And you've always been keen to seek the right tools and automations and hacks that you might, hacks is I guess what I might call them, but things that would speed up or reduce human time and attention on various tasks, particularly things that are repetitive tasks. And in our industry, in our profession for accountants, this is a hot topic. I mean, for the last decade or so in the accounting profession, some but not all in our profession really are on the front end of this topic, and you're one of those that I see as being more on the front end of this particular topic and having kind of a passion for it. And the question I'm leading to on that point is that we know, and the variety of conversations that we have here on this show with us as accountants, we know there's a variety of different expertise that you could develop and that you could focus on. And this is an obvious area of your focus and attention and passion. And so why is this the one? Why is this the thing for you?
I think it really comes down to, I guess, two or three things. I mean, for one, I used to love this show called How It's Made, which has seemingly nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I'll kind of bring it all together. It's just a show where they're showing production processes, right? And there's a lot of very quick things happening that have been mapped out scientifically to, basically be just perfect, right? And so you watch this video and you're like, man, that is absolutely the best way to do whatever the given task is. And you see something like that, and then you think about your day, not you, but me, right? And you just say to yourself, man, I wonder how many things I do every day that have some better answer out there that I just haven't tapped into because nobody put the level of time that they put into whatever that problem was. And so I think some part of it came from that. I think a lot of it came from working with people who had problems at scale that necessitated it. And then working with people who had the ability to do those things who weren't me. So I'd work with programmers, for example, and you run into a problem that you didn't know how to solve. You'd present it to them, they'd show you the answer, and you'd see that their answer is better. And then suddenly you're sold, right? You're convinced. And so now every time you run into a new problem that you find yourself in the same keys 28 times in a row, and you just get tired of it, then you realize, I'm just going to stop and maybe there's a better way, Yeah. And I can't always find them, but there's been a lot of times where I would have otherwise been sitting there for hours typing something and found some better way. And for me, that's really what sold me. getting out of those long tasks.
And so how do you handle people, whether it's clients or colleagues or whoever, that are resistant, that, for lack of a better term, that are resistant, or, just don't seem to appreciate what you're excited about on that, especially when you know that some of what you're talking about is something that could benefit them. But I'm sure you run into this where people are like, nah, I'd rather just do what I'm doing and not be bothered with that, Charlie.
That's a brilliant question, because a lot of the times I don't actually show the other party that that's happening. I'm given a problem. They're asking for an answer. They're prescribing the answer. They're not prescribing the workflow. They're just saying, I have this issue and I need this answer. I could care less how you get there. And they may say that explicitly or they may not. But it's generally true that people don't actually care about how you do your job. They care about the output of the job, and if you're able to consistently produce that, then they're satisfied. And so sometimes I'll try to convince people, and I've had poor success with that, I'll be honest. There's people I work with where I've been like, here's this tool I use, I can't believe you're not using it, and they'll just be stuck in their ways. And I don't think that's wrong per se, but I think that it speaks to your point, which is that a lot of people do not care about what we're talking about because they have yet to be presented with those problems. I mean, truthfully, I think if you've been given a 1,000-row spreadsheet and asked to do something about it, then that's where you become a fan.
Yeah,
right? That's the day you're sold.
I think if our audience is excited about some of the things they're hearing from you on this, then they should check out your channel. Like I said, go to YouTube, find Charlie Zigmond there. You'll see some good material there, including this video about these 10 tools that are not Excel that he personally uses in his workflow. And yeah, I think I'd ask our studio audience today, I'd ask AJ Wheeler and Tammy Hess to come up and maybe see if they've got some questions for you.
Awesome. That sounds good.
All right. Well, yeah, we're back, everyone, with me, Tammy Hess.
Hi.
And AJ Wheeler, as well as Charlie. And yeah, these two were listening to us talk a little bit about Charlie's passion for process, and in particular his video about tools other than Excel that he uses in his workflow. So yeah, maybe turn over to the panel here and you guys kind of throw in some questions you might have.
Yeah. One thing I've been wrestling with lately, and it's actually, this comes from, if people don't know, we have a weekly meeting where like Excel tips are, well, not just Excel, but like software tips are usually offered. And so one of the other team members, Bobby, and yourself usually does that. And I find myself like presented with a problem, I guess. I usually get to a point where I'm like, oh, a tool would make this much easier, but I'm already so far down the path of like brute forcing it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'll just go through with it. I'll just brute force this through and make it work. And if I have to do this again, I'll remind myself that I should like tool this up or like use something. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, is there like a point, or is there like a trigger for you to start digging and looking for a solution outside of like brute forcing something?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great question, because it's very hard to know when is the right time to look for a tool. If you can do something twice, is it the right time at that moment to look? And I think for me, it's the more you do it, the more that need grows. And it takes a series of steps too. I think that's important to acknowledge, is that usually it's a progression. It's I got asked to do something once, found a little bit of a better way the next time I did it. And then every time I revisit that same task, I see if I can find one more. Yeah. And usually by the time I've done it 10 to 15 times, now we're preening, right? Now we've gotten it to the point where it's pretty dialed in. And so I think that repetitive approach of being okay with coming to an answer and then changing it again next week is fine. And a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people, only try to do it once. I think the other thing is just the scale at the problems that they're presented to you. So you said, like, I manually brute force something. I think that works when you can. Yeah. When there's hours in the day to cover that. Depending on how ridiculous your problem is, sometimes that just can't happen.
Sure.
And so I think that forces you into a corner that you otherwise wouldn't be in. Yeah. And that's where I think it's happened for me a lot of the times.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the other side of that? Because this is something I often see where I think there's a very easy solution to something and somebody like over engineers it, or like, something that you could brute force in like 20 minutes. They spent like 4 hours coming up with like a really cool solution.
That's a real problem for me. I had that.
AJ stole my question.
Oh, no. Yeah. So sorry, Tammy. But I guess for me, that line is like you talked earlier about the amount of data. So if you're working with like a small set, like I always see that as like easily brute forceable, but when you're working with like large, like you talked about like 1,000 rows or 1,000 columns or like a very big data set, I think maybe that's the answer, but I don't know. That those two ends of the spectrum, I guess, are always where I'm like, do I take the time to delve an hour into trying to fix this a cool way? Or
well, I think that one of the things is that most problems I get presented with, while they're not usually the same as the other ones, there usually are themes in common. And so sometimes you get presented with one, you spend 4 hours working through this one thing, and it's to the point, like you said, where it's getting ridiculous on this task. You should have just brute forced it. And at first there's that moment of like regret, right? Did I waste my day doing this? But then 2 weeks goes by and you present with a different problem, and it turns out that some of the themes that were present in the first one are also in the second one, and you can leverage the solution that you had for the first one to work on the second one. And if you consider that, then I think it almost always becomes, as long as you believe that it will continue happening, it almost always makes sense to find the more long-term answer, because usually the long-term answer applies to 5 or 10 of the different things, especially when you get to the point where you've broken it down real procedurally, because those steps, those keys, those whatever things you would click are, like I said, present in a bunch of them. So I try not to limit myself in that way, but I've too felt that same frustration you're talking about wasting a day and feeling like you have a lot to show.
I like that answer though, kind of big picture look at it, you know what I mean, and try to find commonalities and like connecting them after the fact. I think that's a great answer. Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of tweak my question a little bit. So how about when you're first using a tool or developing a tool, and you're maybe midway in and it's just not working? How long do you give yourself, or how much time do you kind of devote into trying to make that solution or that tool work, or before you assess it and say, maybe this is not the right tool for this application? And kind of how do you make that determination process as well?
Mine's really long, and I think that's where I'm different than everybody else. I think that I'm willing to spend, if I think there's a better way to do something and I'm doing it the dumb way, I'm going to spend 8 hours, 10 hours on it, even if that means multiple sittings, because I just refuse to believe that it won't come up again. It usually does require, like, you have to be good at resetting. You have to be good at stepping away from a problem, because I've been in that situation before, and you get frustrated quick. You feel like you're spinning your wheels. And so I think that skill of being able to step away from it and then come back again with a fresh approach, reread what you did and start over, has really helped a lot. And so I would never spend more. I would spend 8 hours on a problem, for example, but I would never spend more than 2 consecutively on that problem, because I feel like you would get to a point where you're not improving it unless you reset.
So would you give up on that particular tool or that kind of problem process, or would you take a break and then kind of revisit it under new sets of eyes?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, I'd take a break, step away, and then revisit again, new set of eyes, and be okay if it takes 2 weeks. It's hard to do. I get that with pressure and with everything, it can be difficult to devote that time. But for me, since everything is so general, it feels like even a 2-week timeline on a fix, if I believe I can use it, can make sense in the long run, depending on how much time it would save me. That's a very good question, because, that's hard to know.
Yeah. I'm always curious about that, because I probably give up quick sooner than later, because I get frustrated, and I'm like, I can't even imagine, doing that. I feel like I'm spinning my wheels too long on that, and I'll go back to the brute force type of situation. So I am always curious to see, like, is it better to kind of plan to invest a lot of time up front, especially if it's something that you think is going to be helpful going forward? And then how much do you actually put into that schedule for that planning piece? Because there's also deadlines, or sometimes, and that trickier. Do you have to like say, I'm going to brute force it for now, I'm going to come back to it so I can develop it later?
That's the part that's really hard, honestly. That's the part where I have ended up brute forcing an answer that I've later found a long-term solution on. But the thing that with me is like, even when I brute force something, it'll still bug me. It's just because I got it done and got the answer in, I'll still go home that night and think about what could have been done different. And so, I think that's where a lot of that has came from, is just even solved problems can be done better. It's just how much time are we willing to, go on it.
Well, I think that really summarizes the theme of kind of if people look at your YouTube channel and listen to this program, is that it's not for you. It's of course, you may be engaged to come up with a final answer, but the real mission that you're on is the elegance of the solution, like coming up with the optimal process. And that kind of brings us full circle to what we were saying about kind of where your passion is in terms of your passion is in improving those processes. The answer is just a nice side effect.
Absolutely. There's so many things that we all do every day that can be done better, and unless we're actively searching for that, then we might not find it.
Yeah. Well,
I got one more for our listeners, parting. So we mentioned Excel as like the go-to for accountants, and hopefully the people listening are accountants. What's one tool you would recommend to the audience that's not Excel that you think is the most necessary for an accountant?
For an accountant?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do an obscure one that I don't know, I'll get a lot of agreement in on this. For me, auto hotkey has been huge because so many of our problems, if you change the way you view problems and you say, can I solve this with a series of key presses?
Yeah.
Well, it so often turns out that even complicated problems can still be solved by a series of repeated or well thought out keystrokes. And so I think it's one of the most robust tools, because when you go back to the problem it's just a matter of being able to hit the right things on the keyboard, and that tool can type stuff on the keyboard. It can press, scripts or whatever that you would write up. And a lot of people have already written the answers, so you're not actually starting from scratch. You're finding some other guy's answer and working your way through it. That makes it, for me, the most robust tool that I think a lot of people could apply, because as long as your job involves a keyboard, that's all I need.
Charlie's striving for never having to reach for his mouse, I think.
I'm very big on that. Very big on that.
Well, we're going to have Charlie back to talk more about process improvement and his other tips and tricks along the way on that. So, look forward to doing that in a future episode. And until then, thank you guys for joining me again today.
Yeah, thanks
everyone.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks for indulging me here.
Yeah. All right, we're signing off.
Bye.
See you, everybody.